I'm making an assumption that women have contributed to shaping the town of Moshi. And I'm asking the question, how have women transformed Moshi, Tanzania from a colonial administrative center into an African urban center of transportation and commerce? I want to do a quick survey of who has heard of Moshi, Tanzania. Okay, how about those who've heard of Mount Kilimanjaro? Yeah, all right. So Moshi is the base town for Mount Kilimanjaro. And I have this quote here about referencing the mountain as an essential ingredient of national identity, and so of Tanzania's self-image. In a sense, Tanzania's identification with Mount Kilimanjaro is an attempt to recapture what has been stolen. So as a historian and particularly focused on urban centers, most of the historiography, the literature focuses on, in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, Kenya, Nairobi, these major, either the most populous cities or the capital cities. But I think I'm going to make the argument that Moshi has been quite central to Tanzania's political development. And I also think it represents a lot of the disruptions that colonization brought, as well as promises and challenges of independence. So in terms of Moshi and colonization, it was first built as a German colonial administrative center. And predating that, it was a central stopping point for the caravan trade that ran from Tanzania's coastline to the Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika, inland. So it also has this identity of being a pass-through point. So I think that's something interesting. In 1889, Berlin hosted a state reception for 4 political figures from Moshi. And in 1900, the Germans hanged 19 regional chiefs, one of whom there's a current fight for getting his remains back. In 1915, Jan Smuts led a campaign as part of World War I and defeated the Germans in Moshi. And then transitioning to kind of the challenges and promises of independence. In my experience in Tanzania, there is a perception/stereotype that Chaga, who are the main people group of this area, have a lot of their own national pride. And independence has caused some conflict because the chief of the area was not as keen. He wanted independence, but wanted Chaga to maintain their own autonomy within that, which I think reflects a lot of struggles that countries have faced moving to independence. And then another kind of sub-interest is that there was a large Asian diaspora, primarily sub-India diaspora within Moshi. So as of the 1950s, the decade before independence, about 90% of the building owners represented Asian diaspora. So I'm also interested in looking at that side of the town's story and how that has or has not shifted. And then Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's kind of founding father, first president, declared independence at Moshi. And again, with the significance of the mountain, someone carried a torch up there on the eve of independence. So even though Moshi, there's not been a historical account of the town, it keeps popping up in all these small ways when I'm reading about other aspects of Tanzania's history. Also, the person who helped Nyerere pen the Constitution was based in Moshi, so Nyerere was there to write Tanzania's Constitution. And on a more kind of personal level, when I first visited Moshi, I was very struck by the contrast of these buildings that are remnants of colonization and how they have been transformed today into shops selling everyday products, mosquito nets, curtain rods, clothing, some tourist items, but also a lot of household goods. So people come to Moshi from around the mountain to do their household shopping. So this is the, you can see Ladoc building with the date 1936. I went and walked around a cemetery that had a large representation from the Ladoc family. So just kind of making those connections and again, wondering what that story is. This is the railroad line first reached Moshi in 1912. So I was still under the German era. And they actually moved the town. It used to be further up the mountain and they moved it down to meet the railroad. But now the railroad that used to be this central feature of colonization and transporting goods, as you can see, overgrown with grass and people walk along it a lot to going to and from work. So I'm interested in this transition of space. And then I want to focus on women. Someone asked me how I know that women contributed to the town. My answer today is that if there was a town built, then women contributed. So I have this photo here just as an example. This is one of the chiefs and it has his full name there and the date that he held office, and then it just says with his wife. So as a researcher, I want to center women and tell, bring to light the contributions that they have made. And another little tidbit is that Tanzania's first female member of parliament was born in Moshi. So just all these tiny little connections back to this sleepy yet urban area. Close with my planned methods, but again, I'm also still really narrowing down how to define contributions and transformation, looking at women. As I mentioned, I'm particularly interested in physical space, but I also want to somehow get at women's experiences. What has it meant to be a woman in Moshi in the decades after independence? So some proposed methods and ethnography, focus groups, life narratives, oral histories, and walking interviews. This was a method I learned about in Hannah Britton's WGSS methods class. And I think it could really get to this interest I have in kind of Moshi as a place and what that means to women. So what points around town hold meaning for them. And then I will, it's not up there, Liz, but it is on my notes that I will also visit the archives and do my due diligence. And that's what I have.
Okay, that was excellent. Thank you so much. And so many interesting things that we can talk about. So now let's open up the floor for questions and comments from the audience. We have about 20 minutes left for that, so perfect timing. And I think what we'll do is take a few comments and questions, and then Alicia, you can respond. Who'd like to start?
I'll start. I'm curious to know more about how the economy of Moshi relates to the mountain of Kilimanjaro, especially as a tourist site. So the very, my imagination takes me to, how many men are working on the mountain? For what periods of time are they away? How does that shape family structure? How does that shape women's responsibilities within a town where men might be elsewhere, but it's a different form of migration? Well, might be, I have no idea.
Right.
than other kinds of migrant family structures that we've talked about today.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to know more about that.
Yeah.
So I have some questions about the origins of the project, or okay, two questions. One question, yeah, is it exactly that? Why? What's the motivation for the project? This particular project, like the intellectual motivation, is it, or is it more because the way you roll it out, it's kind of like, oh, here's an interesting place. I'm interested in women doing things, and so I'm gonna look at how they contribute. I mean, that's a little bit facetious, but I wanted to say more than the construction, argue against that construction. The other one is, why you? Like, why are you the person to do this thing? What is it that you want to show that you think you can be the one to show?
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, so Alicia, real quick, just, we both know the answer to be pretty well, been around density planning, but like, what about Moshi, going back to Adam's point, what about Moshi is special besides the former colonial legacy? And how are women organizing Moshi now? Are there street vendors, are there women's associations? I don't know if you've done an investigation with them, but that might be a way to expand your scope and look at how temporary women's organizations, be it labor collectives, be it farming collectives, are there influencing current Moshi's current trajectory.
I'll start with those 3 to 4. So, economy of Moshi as it relates to being a tourist site, yes, and then also the migration. So this is all, again, I have not collected data. So just in the secondary reading I have done, and a little bit of what I know from having lived there, my initial thought is that the income going to Mount Kilimanjaro largely goes to the state and to private companies, a lot of whom are not. I don't know how that looks. I know that's true at the national park level. Actually, it would be interesting to see, since this is mountain green, if that changes the dynamics. Like a lot of the high-end lodges and all of that infrastructure there's a lot of outside ownership. And then porters, I know to climb Kili, you have to have a certain number of porters who have gone through their certification. But I would guess they're paid very little. Yeah, and that's one that I'm thinking a lot about how much I want to focus on that aspect. My inclination is to not as much, because I think that's what has been done a little bit. People have looked at tourism, people have looked at borders, and I'm trying to make this case for why the town itself matters. But certainly I think that question about family dynamics will be really important. I have read that in general it's an area of migration. My very limited experience there with this particular woman who I met her down in town center, and then we went up to her farm on the mountain. So you go up the mountain to get your jackfruits, and then you come down the mountain to sell them. And I know also with porters that they're not necessarily from that area, but definitely should do some background reading on that. Okay, so my motivations for the project. I think it started off from a personal angle of I had been to Moshi, so I lived about an hour away near Arusha, which is a bigger city. But Arusha, I didn't see that contrast as much of the physical infrastructure of colonization side by side with these new businesses, Tanzanian businesses, people operating. So there's something about that pulls me. And then I think I'm also hoping to make the argument again that we should not only look at cities like Dar es Salaam as being center to Tanzania's identity. I think an urban center like Moshi has as much to tell us as Dar. It's a strong statement to me, but that's something important to tell us. Yeah, that's best I can argue at the moment. And then I expected this question. I don't have the best answer for why me. I can tell you my qualifications to date are that I have studied Swahili since 2016. I can considered a second language. I've considered it a second language since about 2019. I lived in Tanzania from off and on from 2018 through 2020 with 6 months across on the other side of Kilimanjaro, working in Kenya. And I do think it's something I think a lot about, and the positionality and the intersectionality of different identities. And again, just in my very limited experience, I've had women kind of take me in because of my Swahili. And so I see myself positioned as a researcher based in the West who is able to go talk to women who don't otherwise get to interact with educated, formally educated white people. That it's, yeah, a chance to tell a history that would not necessarily, but there might be someone out there doing it. I don't know. Yeah, but that access, I made that sort of joke about archives at the end. I'm a historian, archives are king. But I'm a lot more interested in bringing in human stories and histories stored within people and generations. So I think that my language will facilitate that. I'm sure I'm not the best person to do it. Here we are. How women are organized. Yes, that's also on my list of things to look into. There definitely are cooperatives. I know there's like a milk cooperative and a yogurt cooperative. And I'm in touch with a scholar who's done some look at women's organizations. There is a YWCA there. I've not been in touch with them. It's operating.
I have some
Yeah.
questions / feedback based on sort of what Glenn was saying as a way to phrase it as thinking about your position as someone who has a particular understanding of what a woman is. And when you said, I want to highlight what women are doing and all of those things, I get it. But at the very same time, I think an interesting question would be, as a historian, how has the concept of women or a woman changed after independence? Then after the Ujama project sort of opened up, and then neoliberalism and all of that stuff which happened, and now recently we have Salma. I'm forgetting the name of the Samia. Mama Wetu, yes.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that as a part of a historical project, I think an interesting research question would be, according to the archives, this material embeddedness of a woman as a person with a relational role in society. How has that evolved as a part of this possibly a tourist location?
Yeah.
Or maybe we are imparting our gaze on it right now, has changed over time according to these different phases Tanzania as a country, as a state has gone through.
Yes, so that will most likely be a chapter of my project. Yeah, I'm looking at some news articles right now and trying to get to this question of the conception of womanhood via news and kind of at the policy level. And then that is one of the things I need to figure out on the ground, because that has been one of my questions. I don't want to assume what womanhood means for Tanzanian. So do I make that its own focus in asking women, you know, how that operates for them?
Okay, are there any other comments or questions?
I could sense you're still like getting started.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
reluctant to, but could you tell us a little bit more about what archives you think might be out there? And I'm particularly interested in this because I'm very persuaded that your language skills qualify you in a certain way, in an interesting way to continue with this project. And so I'm so glad that oral history is going to be a part of your method that really uses those language skills. And I'm wondering what's available in the archive where your language skills might again be used. So are there newspaper materials in local languages? Like, what are the materials there, especially those that you could find in other?
Yeah.
It's like-
Yes, yeah, and I'm certainly hoping to find personal archives and draw from those. In terms of the formal archives, by word of mouth, I think there's should absolutely know this, so thank you for asking me. Like the Gender and Social Policy Committee, something like that, that was operating, I believe, during and after Ujamaa. I was directed that way. And then also the Moshi piece, the National Housing Corporation has also built a lot of buildings. So I'm curious to see what is in there. And then feel very honored. I've been also connected with Marjorie Bellini. That means anything to anyone. She's like, does all this stuff on women in Tanzania. So I'm hoping she might also have some things that she is ready to just pass on, but I don't know.
Yeah, I would add to that one kind of powerful thing about the way you're framing this so far is that historically in archives, it's not all voices that are there, and even the women that showed up in this presentation are elite women, right? It's the
Right.
wife of the chief, like that you could go track down, and that is definitely a woman. And women like her, I'm sure, made contributions. But it's so easy, especially once we're dealing with archives, to mistake elite women for women. And so what you've described in the oral history and the ethnography and walking interviews is access not only to the gender category, but a class category.
Yeah.
That seems really important, especially when we're talking about these spaces that are iconic in a national imagination, right? That like to whom does this mountain belong, or to whom does this town belong, and all of those kinds of things. So I'm excited to see what comes of those methods that so purposefully engage, a broader population, or think it intersectionally about the category of woman as not merely being represented by the chiefs. Right?
Did you want to,
No, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to ask if you wanted to respond to that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I'm hoping to be representative amongst class, but also a primary goal of focusing on this kind of oral history approach and ethnography is that I can speak with those women who are out on the sidewalk selling their wares and learn what living in Moshi has been for them.
How much time do we have?
We have 6 minutes.
All right, so if it was, I think that, maybe along the lines of Omar's question, or at least where it's coming from, I think that, like, I wanted to push you on the questions that I asked, not to like, but to give you a sense for the kind of thing that people are gonna want to know, or like, and wonder about. And I think my sense of like why you would be that you're not necessarily trying to tell a story about there, because I don't know that you have a lot of skills, but still the question of there, like who is the representative to do that versus a question about something that's bigger than that but from them. So like using this particular place and the things you're interested in to be able to say something that's not like, okay, I'm gonna talk about these people and their voice.
Yes, right.
Not anything like that, but rather, which you didn't say, but that's like the construction of what people might hear. So then I'm gonna, what, standing here and looking out, what is it that I can say about those things? And you may not know what that is
Yeah.
right now. But I think being, like, that's the walking interview and all those other kind of very open-ended, open to kind of hearing things and thinking about like, what is the what does this particular site afford? Because the other thing about why there, your answers are good for 70 towns in Tanzania, right? I mean, it's not that,
Yeah,
it's like, it's not Dar.
Right.
Okay, well, there's a lot of places
Right.
that are not Dar, so it's something more about tourism or the fact that this had a lot of traffic through there, so there would have been opportunities to engage
Right.
certain kind of global imaginations, or at least something like that. That's I think
um,
preparing yourself to be thinking about those kind of broader things
Right.
that this place is good.
please, the broader.
I just add in like a cautionary kind of advice or something. You can go to the field with that kind of broad, like, tell me all the things women did, like, let's go on a walk and talk about all of it. And you can kind of write a dissertation that's a list of those things, you know, like, here's a thing, that's a chapter. Here's this other thing, you can do that, but it's not as good as just picking. You're gonna hear a bunch of those things, and you write them all down. Right, you save some of them for other things, for the next book or the whatever, like the way you can be, like, if you get into the field, even just by this fall, like. Like find a thread, and I think that one thread will answer all of these things together. Why why this town, why women, why this historical period, like. And you're gonna have to make like some hard choices and where your attention goes to pick that thread and do a good job at that thread, so that when the time you're coming back, you have ideally not a list of chunks of things that women have done, but
Yeah.
a really cool story about it. And that's hard.
No.
But just for where you are now, know that that's gonna be one of your challenges. It's like starting broad, but like getting narrow
Yeah.
as,
I would like to narrow.
as
Or
quickly
getting
as,
there. Yeah.
as quickly as you can. It's just, it's hard, but it's like, and it will feel like jettisoning stuff that could also be interesting. So it's hard to like, not hang on to the vestiges of the 8 other projects you could have done.
Narrow. It's already my struggle.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes left. Are there any other comments or questions? All right, then I think in this last maybe minute, I'll just add a comment. I think all of these are incredibly helpful perspectives and points to think about, especially when we're talking about African women. And we are, US researchers and scholars that are going into these communities and then attempting to produce some sort of valuable knowledge, right? So, in doing that, you're engaging in a variety of methods that I think are really useful when you put them together. But one of the things I want to focus on is your ethnography. So, you'll be doing research with women and also people who live in Moshi. Have you thought about risks that are associated with engaging in this kind of field work on these kinds of topics? And what steps are you taking to kind of mitigate those risks, if any?
Yeah, very important question. I need to think through that more. So ethnography was proposed as a method 2 weeks ago. So, yeah, still thinking what that would look like, and I will be preparing my IRB. And I mean, that's something I would love to hear too from people who have been in the field. I'm not necessarily looking at a sensitive topic, but you also don't know what is going to come up when you ask women about their stories. And just in some of my reading from this one scholar I mentioned, I mean, oftentimes it does relate to domestic violence or things they have faced in society as women that are negative. So yeah, I do need to think about that more and welcome perspectives from people who've been in the fields.
Okay, excellent. And I'm happy to talk about this with you more after the workshop. If you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to kind of have a discussion. So we are out of time. Thank you so much for that very robust discussion. I think now let's go ahead and move to our next presenter. Hello, Eric. It's good to see you again. So Eric is going to be presenting the birth of a superpower. And just get started whenever you're ready.
Absolutely, yeah. Great to see you again, Dr. Ghazali, as always. We miss you here at KU. I hope you're doing well in Houston. It's just so great to connect with you like this. But yeah, my topic is about the birth of superpower, the East African Federation. There's this looming project in East Africa that's gone unnoticed by most Western scholars, by most Western people, because we're not tracking these trends. The East African community has been a feature of East African politics for the last 60 some years. In some capacity, cooperation between African states has always been around and often preceded the formation of these states. The regional governments of Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda were, Tanganyika, pardon me, were collaborating on different issues, coordinating different projects, and working together to serve each other and broaden their power within these colonial systems they operated in. The first version, so after colonialism ended and these states became independent, it was only natural for them to continue their cooperation. The first version of the EAC will last between 1967 and 1977, where Nyerere, Jomo Kenyatta, and Idi Amin would eventually come into conflict, and that would lead those rising tensions between these three leaders would lead to the dissolution of the East African community. It seemed like East African cooperation would end, as did other cooperation between African states. At the same time, as in the late 70s, early 80s, we started to see this kind of Pan-Africanist movement fizzle out. But the East African community reestablished in 2000, and since 2000 has made significant strides towards politically integrating and establishing monetary unions, common policies, common trade, so on and so forth. So in the last 24 years, almost 24 years now, we've seen massive expansion from the original three states of Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya to Rwanda and Burundi in 2009, South Sudan in 2016, Congo Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2021, 2022, and Somalia was just admitted to the EAC as a member state in late 2023, although the Parliament of Somalia has yet to affirm the union and has yet to formally sign on to the treaty. So that's why it's asterisk. Well, that's why there's a denotation that maybe Somalia will join this year, or maybe it has already joined, depending on how we put that and interpret that. But the East African community, since its reformation, has been focused on these four pillars of regional integration, deepening regional ties between each state and making sure that these states are cooperating together, leveraging their power together to enter the global market, enter the global political systems, and to make East Africa this strong independent unit. So the first pillar is this customs union, where the East African community states have jointly joined together to negotiate for trade deals. Foreign firms, they've reduced protectionist policies, meaning that's easier to trade with Kenya and Tanzania from within each state. It's easier for Kenyans and Tanzanians to trade with each other. It's easier for people to move. They've reduced the tariffs on, they've reduced barriers on entry from passports, from taxes on trucks and lorries. They've improved rail access, coordinating on rail access and other critical transportation infrastructure. And there's also been efforts established to make monetary union, the customs union. They're set to be achieved in the coming year. In 2023, it was announced that in 4 years, the East African shilling would be introduced, so long as all the insurance and processes necessary to make that transition from 8 individual currencies to one unified currency is set in place. So within the next 4 years, we're entering a very critical stage in this development as we move forward from this loose confederation of states into a more federalized state. And this political federation has always kind of been the end goal of the East African community. In 2017, the then 6 states of the East African community, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, and South Sudan signed on to an agreement saying that they would become a political confederation, that they would start to deepen their ties, not only economically, but also politically, ratifying to promote good governance and to start this transition towards a political federation. So the recent additions of DRC and Somalia only add weight and momentum to this project. This is a huge project as is, because we don't ever see states emerge like this. It's very rare to see states willingly give up their sovereignty and join into one supranational entity. Not supernatural, supernational, pardon me. Although it could be considered supernatural, I guess. But, the point being here is we don't see this ever happen in world history. This is very rare occurrence, so it's worth studying because of that. And the East African Federation would immediately reshape global politics because it's a huge, huge country. It would be the fourth largest state in the world by population with 330 million residents. It would be the seventh largest state in the world by land area. It would have some of the largest coastline in Africa as well. It would be the largest African state. It would be the 44th most wealthy country in the world by gross domestic product at $351 billion. And they'd have the ninth largest military in the world with 620,000 active duty and reserve soldiers. So this is a huge power that could reshape African politics, that could reshape global politics, and it's engaged in global systems already, as each of these 8 states has their own alliances, has their own funding, their own foreign aid, so on and so forth. And they also have their own political agendas, which could challenge the progression towards the federation. In 2022, the president of Uganda's son, Yoweri Museveni's son, threatened to invade Kenya. And Kenya and Uganda have been cooperating in this organization for over 20 years. So it was shocking. There was a lot of diplomatic backlash. There was threats to withdraw diplomats and withdraw membership from the AC. The recent conflict in the Congo, the ongoing conflict in Congo, has been linked to Rwandan funders. The M23 rebels are believed to be funded by the Rwandan government, by Kagame's Rwanda. So there's tensions there, and Congo has repeatedly expelled diplomats as recently as October 31st, 2022, over this kind of ongoing spate. And as we're seeing today, the ongoing tensions between Somalia and Somaliland also could bring Somalia into conflict with the Ethiopian state. So this is a very precarious thing. As much as there's promise here, there's a lot of significant political challenges, security challenges, and so on. So to study this event, I'm going to look at using mixed methods approach, heavily grounded in this institutionalization and development of literature, common political science, to understand the contemporary and historical challenges that had prevented the East African Federation from succeeding. And I'll be addressing the following research questions throughout this piece. Right now, this is a prospectus, so I've yet to collect any data other than to identify sources and to identify areas of inquiry. But my research questions are: what are the historical barriers that have prevented East African migration? How is the current process of state building different from historical efforts to form a federal state? How likely is it that the efforts of the East African community will succeed in the state building process? What are the popular sentiments from experts on the AC and members of the public on the process of state building? Do they view this as a worthwhile endeavor, or do they think that this is a waste of time? What impacts would the East African Federation have on international community and in Africa and in the world? So with these research questions, I'm kind of organizing my thoughts around different themes, particularly the history of East Africa and East African immigration. That'll be a chapter in my upcoming dissertation. I'm planning to start off with Joseph S. Nye, who's one of the preeminent political science scholars in all of one of the most prominent political science scholars ever. He wrote his doctoral dissertation in the 1960s about East African immigration. I'm planning to take his approach and update it by building on that spine with more contemporary research in the last 60 that have occurred over the last 60 years to ground myself historically and to add additional context. Another chapter, another area of inquiry will be looking at this challenging route towards integration, trying to understand how the East African Federation could manage existing state policies, state identities, and the existing tensions between member states. I'll also discuss how the EAF will manage its relations with the rest of the world, which alliances will be prioritized. These 8 states have funding from different resources. They have different supporters, different business interests, particularly France, the United States, United Kingdom, and China are very active in this region diplomatically and in terms of foreign aid. So it'll be interesting to see which of those relations will be prioritized. I'll also look at the perspectives of future on the EAC, looking at how by interviewing individual policy experts on their opinions, their beliefs about the goal, about the project, so on and so forth. And I'll also be deploying a general population survey in at least one EAC member state to get an idea of what the public believes about this, this project and how they feel things are going to go. I'll also spend a chapter or perhaps several chapters looking at potential pitfalls and predictions about the East African Federation. There's issues to be addressed like internal and external migration, securitization, currency and monetary policy, leadership, and the current heads of states. You know, we're seeing these 8 states transition from one power from 8 powers to 1. There's significant questions that need to be addressed. And there's a few that I've identified and a few that I've anticipated, perhaps coming from the crowd. The EAC is different than ECOWAS. It's different than other intergovernmental organizations in Africa because these states are willing to give up their sovereignty. They're willing to give up their EU vote, their United Nations votes, their individual powers to become one collective unit. So that makes them uniquely distinct from other international governmental organizations. The EAC's efforts are different than the Arab League in the sense that the Arab League is more affiliational, based on religion, based on culture. And there was a successful United Arab Republic, although it was short-lived from 1958 to 1961, where Syria and Egypt became a joint state, but that quickly dissolved. So perhaps EAF will follow a similar federation, and it remains to be seen what the impacts of this will be. I think it's a worthwhile project, and looking forward to any and all feedback that you all have to help me bring this from a prospectus to a fully fleshed out project. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was great. So let's open the floor for our discussion. We have about 18 minutes left.
All kinds of questions. I think I'll use my selfish one. And a comment of something a scholar to look into, Priya Lal, book on socialism, Tanzania. You might want to consider moving your timeline backward, looking before independence,
Sure.
when all of these colonized places, colonized states were talking about independence. There was a lot of discussion about trying to create a more unified state and everybody kind of connect. And so everyone declared their own independence. Along that line, this question of states, this is my selfish question with my own work. Your very first slide said that the cooperation between these East African states precedes their creation as states.
Right.
And I'm wondering how you talk about that, because I had the same struggle with thinking of Tanzania as a state during colonization, when it was not really just transitioning to becoming a state, and the whole Tanganyika and Tanzania, and just, yeah, how to talk about these terms over time. Curious what approach you're taking.
Yeah, I'm still developing that, because again, it's prospectus, but I think that's a really good question because like in many ways, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya were kind of independent. They had very loose administration compared to other regions in the world. Like India, for example, had very tight administration, whereas Kenya and Tanzania were a little bit more independent. The more regional governors were coming from within the state. There's more pseudo sovereignty almost. They were part of the British Empire, but they weren't necessarily like direct. Obviously part of the protectorate and part of the. Maybe I'm misspeaking here, but I think it's fair to characterize them as a little bit more independent than some other colonial possessions. So perhaps that might be part of it. That might be where the state identity started to form. That is maybe the first officials in the new Tanganyikan state and new Kenyan state and new Uganda state came from the existing apparatus of British colonialism. So I'm thinking that's where the distinction lies. That there's already kind of this idea that we're part of the empire, but not quite. If that helps at all.
I want to ask about some of the framing that was explicit and implicit in your presentation, which is great. You kind of present this case as like so exceptional, the first time in the history of the world that this would be happening. And you present it like also like it's crazy because not, but it's exceptional because and you're giving up sovereignty, like all these things. But then you, like, in your research questions, you're like, but why did it fail? And like, you've just given us all these reasons that like, we shouldn't expect it to succeed.
Right.
So I'm wondering a little bit, like, do you think there's actually more interesting reasons, like historical barriers? And could you point to those? Because I think you've given us a whole bunch of obvious ones, but the fact that you keep that question there makes me think there must be something behind it.
Right, yeah, that's a great question, Stacey. Really, I'm thinking like, the thing might have been just, maybe it was the personalities, but maybe it's also the will, maybe the fact that there wasn't this groundwork in place, like this current iteration of the East African community has been building for 25 years to this point, you know, now that we're within striking distance, quote unquote, like maybe the momentum and weight has been more intentional, maybe there's been more structural rules. So if I look at the documents that the East African community has released, they're all there. Their guidelines, look, do some textual analysis, do some keyword searches to figure out what the shift is. Perhaps there was different momentum behind it. Perhaps, you know, after colonization, and, you know, obviously the characters matter, of course, too. Like Idiom matters. The word Mississippi matters. Kenyatta matters. They all matter. So perhaps the personalities of the current crop of leaders is different. Perhaps that's playing into it. So there's so many angles I could go with that. That's why I want to include the historical question, because I feel like I can't talk about the contemporary issues without acknowledging this is a 60-year-long process. It's not a 10-year process. It's not a 1-year process. It's not a single event. Rather, it's this culmination of hope streams and energy.
Yeah, maybe one thing to like flag there is that, is it possible that there was like political advantage in talking about all of this for 60 years that's quite different than the actual political advantage of like making it happen? And so the sense of like momentum or inertia is like what people wanted everyone to feel, and maybe, you know, there were other things at play.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Other comments or questions?
I'm curious about how you're going to approach the predictive aspects of these questions. Yeah. General question, how are you approaching that?
Right,
What will
so-
it be based on?
Yeah, so these are predictive, yes, because I'm starting out. These are what things I hope to accomplish, but I'm trying to approach this from the ground zero approach. That's an intelligent, social science research where you are a participant, of course, you participate in your surveys, you are present when you talk with people, but you let the questions and the data guide you. You can have your theoretical bias, but perhaps more interesting, more compelling questions will emerge. So instead of having, you know, 10 interview questions I want to use in every interview, I'll maybe keep 3 by the end of my last set of interviews. Maybe that there will be something that emerges. These are the ground theory approach allows for that reflexivity, that allows for the data to guide you instead of the theory. The theory is there. The theory is this is exceptional in state literature. This is exceptional in institutionalization literature. So that's where I draw my distinction, but I'm going to approach my methodology, approach these questions in a way it's not predictive so much as receptive to what emerges.
So just to clarify, you'd be asking people what impacts an East African Federation would have on the international.
Right. So that's why.
It'd be like a research.
Yeah, exactly. So I was hoping to, you know, talk with policy experts, talk with members of the public and see like, is there a benefit to this program? Like, do you feel better as Kenyans or do you feel better as East Africans, for example? So that's kind of how I'm approaching that. And by talking to people, hopefully I've reached out to organizations in East Africa. I've reached out to the East African community directly to, you know, see if I can get interviews, to get, you know, start arranging fieldwork visits, stuff like that. Talking with experts at research centers like the Point Institute, I'll be able to get a better perspective on not only indigenous knowledge, but also the expert indigenous knowledge on the prospects of this operation.
I have a short methodological question. It's on one hand, I like how you're doing this very phenomenological research where you're interviewing people, like the citizens, but also the people, the people, you know, the policymakers. Then you're also analyzing policy documents. Could you like, just for pedagogical purposes, like share, like how do you plan on making that connection between documents being put out between these bodies, think tanks and so on and so forth, and also the more psychological and subjective research you're gonna be doing?
Yeah, so within political science, there's a lot of established literature on how the memos presented by governments, the press releases are examples of leader speech. So that perhaps is carrying leader speech directly. So that I've drawn that kind of literature and talk about how if there's, 20 people in a room writing this memo, that means they're spending intellectual energy. They're spending their time, their efforts to craft this message in this way, and that matters somehow. So that's kind of how I'm going to draw that linkage. If that helps answer your question, Omar. It's kind of drawing on that existing literature about leader speech, about leader thought, and linking it from not only one level of analysis from the interview, but to the other kind of implicit assumptions that exist because of the memos, because of the way that information is.
Do you anticipate a contradiction, sort of like manufacturing consent of the state making?
Yeah, I don't expect that this will be straightforward at all. I think that that's why I need to be receptive to this, because I think as soon as I get there, there might be trends that emerge, that I do not anticipate. Maybe there is no public will for the EAC, perhaps for the East African community to integrate as a state. Perhaps it's only a elite-driven process. So then that would change my nature of my research, direction of my research, to figure out why it's an elite-driven and why it's not supported by the public. So I'm definitely going to be receptive to any and all possibilities that can emerge from this.
I have a follow-up question on that, which is that, do you have reason, like just from being there and like following like just social media or something, like do people care? Cause I feel like the harder thing to deal with in your project is not if people are against it, but it's just, you're just like, I'm just imagining acting like normal people about like ECOWAS, like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's the shortest interview in the world. And I know you do have language skills here, right? And so it seems like we were talking about Alicia's case, like what do you bring to this as a scholar? And those language skills do give you this incredible opportunity to connect with ordinary people. But I think I'm really curious, like, will ordinary people give a shit? and even if they give you if they're willing to talk about, like, what do people have to say?
Yeah, no, you're great point, Stacey. I mean, that's my curiosity. It's in the Afrobarometer. I had a brief mention of this in my slides, but the Afrobarometer measures on this are really like, people are ambivalent. Like, people don't really seem to care. So I'm curious what the breakdown is there. Is it a message from the state not branding this as a transformative thing? Is it a perception of the public that this might not impact them? So I think it's just worth going and asking, because to borrow from Richard Fenno, soaking and poking, being around the people, being around opening yourself to these opportunities and figuring it out. I don't think that I can find this from where I sit here in Lawrence, Kansas. I need to find a way to be incisive and to get to the bottom of this, because I think there's a lot of breakdown somehow, some way. And looking at social media, looking at press releases, they're not getting a lot of engagement, not getting a lot of comments, and I'm just not sure if it's what the issue is. Why is this not top of everyone's mind? Like, I've talked to other academics here at KU, here at other universities, and nobody seems to be aware that this is an ongoing process, that this is so close to happening. Perhaps it's far away, perhaps people are pessimistic on it as is, and they're not putting a lot of faith in it because of the immense challenge against it, but I'm puzzled by the lack of energy and awareness.
Yeah, maybe one thing methodologically is to look for, not just to like be in the space, but like look for the time that people had opinions on it. Like look for the thing that made news and people wrote op-eds about or made posts about or something. Like look for a way into this conversation that's not just like, what's your take, pro or con? Like finding a way in can be really productive, especially when people don't necessarily talk about it in their daily life. So it's not like they have a ready narrative to offer you, but they might actually, have associations with a particular politician or a particular kind of event in the last 10 years that they can start talking about.
To that point, I was thinking more about it. I'm thinking about including the priming effect in some of my surveys I want to introduce. and this all depends on cost, all depends on availability of funds, but I would love to do a priming experiment where I give people a little bit net about the impacts of the EAC and see if that influences their opinions. If they might be ambivalent, they might be, after reading the big net, they might be more enthusiastic, they might be more energetic about it. So I'm thinking there's ways to elicit that, even if I can't do it myself through my interviews.
Just very quickly, you mentioned two interpretations of a similar pattern. First of all, you use the word like don't care, and then you use ambivalent.
Yeah.
So I wonder which one you think it is. Do people not care about the issue, or is it that they are passionate about it, but they see pros and cons?
That's a great question, Dr. Adams. I think that's being loose, my terminology there, but I think everyone's probably is better captured. Perhaps there is just, lack of awareness that leads to lack of energy, perhaps that don't like, I don't want to say it, like, I don't know is a data point, like when people say, I don't know, I don't care, that's a data point. That means something's there. They have a reason not to care, they have a reason not to know. So there might be something there. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry, that didn't even answer your question, did it?
No, it doesn't. I don't think you need to answer the question. I think you just have to be aware that be aware that there could be different interpretations of like not being able to formulate an answer.
Yeah.
And you mentioned both of them, so I was just trying to figure out like, yeah, which one, make that aware.
Yeah, no, that's what I think, Dr. Adams.
I'll jump in here real quick. I'm so fascinated by this project, and in my own research, in different ways, I'm thinking about these kinds of regional categories. In your research, or in this presentation, you've talked about East Africa and the history of this sort of region coming together into a federation. But the category of East Africa itself seems sort of a priori. So my question, and it's something that I'm also really interested in understanding better, I see room for intervention here, is in what ways are these regionalizations of Africa rooted in or premised on racial geographies that were established in and through the colonial period? And especially when we're talking about Eastern Africa, that's not a straightforward region at all. And in my research, I'm pushing against this idea of an Arab Muslim North, a sort of Indian, Arab, African East, these sorts of regionalizations are quite problematic. And my conversations with East Africans is that there isn't an East Africa. You have these conversations happening about who is or isn't a part of that, even when we're talking about Somalia versus Kenya or Uganda. And a lot of the conversation ends up being about colorism and perceptions of race. And you mentioned the cultural differences, right? But it's a lot, I think, more complex than that. There's a whole process of racial capitalism that unfolds in this part of the continent. And that process has really shaped what we think of when we say East Africa. So my comment is really to get you to think more critically about how these categories come into being, who's excluded, who's included, and in what sense do things like race and the afterlives of slavery and the slave trade, how are those also shaping then perceptions of who belongs in this category and who doesn't, how it works, if it works, or why it doesn't work?
Yes.
Yeah, like Kate, just looking at the map you have here, DR Congo, East Africa, yeah, it's a part of it. Ethiopia, not East Africa. So there are other things going on there that explain why it's not in the community, but it's like a big carve out.
And I'll just add that Egypt is a big example of this. Egypt is literally on the eastern coast, but it's considered and classified as Northern Africa, and not always, but also more often than not, it's Middle East. And so what's happening to our understanding of Africa and Africans, federations, when we've sort of chopped up the continent in these ways? And how does this new East African Federation play into those kinds of divisions and into that history? And to what extent is it moving us beyond that, if that's a possible outcome? I'd be really interested to understand that. I think there's so much history here that really you need to dig into with your archival work.
Just to respond to some of that directly, the East African community is the East African Federation. Yeah, East Africa is not the correct descriptor anymore because Congo has western coast on the Atlantic. And it's more Middle Africa, but at this point it's more Middle Africa than anything else. But they're inheriting the name East African community from this historical legacy. That's the current operating name of the organization, even though it's no longer purely East African. And perhaps you're interested to reconceptualize what is East African, what is regionalism, and how these, these states operate with each other. I mean, in fact, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya are part of SADC. They're part of the South African Developmental Community. They're part of these other competing institutions. They're Uganda and South Sudan are part of the Nile River Basin. They're affected by issues in Sudan and Libya and Egypt. So there's so many ways to conceptualize it. These regionalisms aren't really the best way to do it, but this is what we're working with right now. And we need this new federation could challenge our existing assumptions on that idea of racial capitalism and its division of the continent into different blocks, different regions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eric. We're out of time, so we'll go ahead and move to our next presenter. So Charity Adela from the Department of Geography will be talking to us about changing dynamics in the area of coastal lagoons in Ghana, a case of the Fosu Lagoon. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charity Adela from the Department of Geography and Atmospheric Sciences of the University of Kansas. Today, I'm talking about the changing dynamics in the area of the coastal lagoons in Ghana, and I'm using the case of the Fosu Lagoon. So the Fosu Lagoon is located in the central region of Ghana. Ghana can be found in West Africa, and this Fosu Lagoon is located in Cape Coast in the central region of Ghana. It has temperatures ranging from 25 degrees Celsius and 35 degrees Celsius. And this variation in this temperature is mostly little throughout the year. And this lagoon is surrounded by a lot of residential houses, a lot of commercial buildings, a lot of industries are located closer to the lagoon. And this lagoon is very important to the people of Cape Coast where it's located because it supports a whole lot of economic activities. It has a social significance to the people. It supports biodiversity. And also it has a religious significance to the people because the people in Cape Coast celebrate an annual festival known as the Fetu Festival. And this lagoon is where the paramount chief go and pour libation before the festival can start. So this lagoon is very important and dear to the people of Cape Coast. During my literature review, I realized that this lagoon is being affected by human activities and natural disasters is contaminating the lagoon. And such activities include water extraction activities, deforestation, improper farming around the lagoon, and also activities, natural events such as climate change is causing this lagoon to be contaminated. In my research, literature review, I realized that a research described the lagoon as a choked lagoon, and some described it as the most polluted lagoon in Ghana. However, this lagoon is very dear to the people that live in Cape Coast. And if a lagoon that have a social importance, economic importance, and even spiritual importance is being polluted, then there is the need for us to look at what is really the effect of this pollution causing over time. Ghana is a country that experienced a lot of annual flooding. a lot of research has looked at how this pollution is affecting the water in the lagoon, how it's affecting the economics of the people. But none of this research has taken the pain to look at how this contamination is affecting the area of the lagoon, which in turn may lead to flooding or may cause the lagoon to dry up in the future. And that necessitated my research to look at how the area of the lagoon is changing over time. And I used data from 1990 to 2023 to look at how this lagoon area is changing over time. So I used geospatial data, Landsat image for 1990. I used Landsat 5 image, satellite image for 1990, Landsat 7 image for 2000, and Landsat 8 image for 2020 and 2023. I used ArcGIS Pro version 3.00 to do all my analysis. Now looking at the years are not distributed evenly, and that was because the data I got for 2010 had a lot of, Landsat 7 for 2010 had a lot of cuts, so I couldn't get a data to use. The few data that don't have cracks had a lot of cloud cover, 98% of cloud cover. So you wouldn't be able to detect anything in the image. That is why I couldn't get any data for 2010 in the data that I used for this analysis. Now in the analysis, I did some form of cleaning of the data to take away the clouds from the data. So I use image filtering to remove clouds from the data. As I already said, I use ArcGIS Pro version 3.0.0 for the analysis. I moved ahead to calculate the NDWI, that is the normalized difference water index. And based on the spectral reflectance curve here, it shows the reflectance of water across the various electromagnetic wavelengths. So I use the normalized difference water index to extract the water boundary from the images that I was working with throughout the years. Then after that, I use the simple threshold method to classify the image into water and non-water. Then after classifying it, I quantified the quantity of water for each of the years. In the Landsat images, all the Landsat 5, 7, and 8 images have a dimension of 30 meters by 30 meters. So based on that, I multiplied it by the number of pixels in each of the water for the various years, and I was able to get the area of the water for the various years I was working with. So for this preliminary work, I realized that from the year 1990 to 2000, I used 1990 as the base year, the area of the lagoon decreased. However, I realized that from 2020 to 2020, from 2000 to 2020, there was an increase. And then from 2020 to 2023, there was also an increase. Initially, 2023 wasn't part of the years I wanted to use for the analysis. But when I saw the increase in the area of the lagoon from 2000 to 2020, I decided to add 2023 because there is a whole lot of gap from 2000 to jump 20 years. So I wanted to see what is the trend. That's why I added 2023 to it. Now, after doing this, there are already literature out there that's showing that these lagoons are being polluted. And as a result, there is a lot of sediment being deposited in this lagoon. With that being said, I don't know whether the increase in the lagoon now is actually because the water level in the lagoon is rising, the volume of the water in the lagoon is rising, or because a lot of sediment has been deposited in the lagoon as a result of that, causing the water level to rise, not necessarily increasing the volume of the water. So I want to do a further analysis to now calculate the volume of the water in the lagoon over this period of time. With this, after doing that, I'll do a correlation analysis using the Pearson correlation coefficient to find out if the volume of the water over this period correlates with the area of the water over this period. Then I will do this analysis, the correlation analysis, using the R programming language to do the correlation. However, the volume of the lagoon over time will be calculated using the ArcGIS Pro version 3.0.0. Now, this research had a few limitations that included the inability to get the data from the 2010 data. And this is as a result of Landsat 7 at that time crashed. So all the data was having this zigzag line. And also there was an issue with cloud cover. So the picture, one of the data I wanted to download for 2010, the only data I got available for 2010 for this period, when I checked the cloud cover, it had 98% cloud cover. So I didn't go ahead to download it. And also some of the images, so because of cloud cover, the images were, some of the image quality were very low. So these are some of the limitations of this way. Now to conclude, I would say that the preliminary findings from this work shows that there was a decrease in the surface water area of the lagoon from 1990 to 2000. However, from 2000 to 2023, there is an increase in the water level. And to ascertain what exactly is causing this increase, and to know if we should be concerned, people living around that area should be concerned with this increase and think of relocating to different places, or to inform policymakers to make rational policy about this area, there is the need to further go and investigate the volume of the water over time to know whether this rise is actually as a result of sediment deposition causing the water to rise, or maybe as a result of natural factors causing the water in the lagoon to increase. That is why the area of the lagoon is increasing. Okay, before I conclude, I would say that I downloaded the data for a specific month. So in the Landsat data, although 2010, I didn't get data for 2010. It doesn't mean that there is no data for 2010. But then the level of water in this closed lagoon can increase if there is an increase in precipitation. And because I didn't want precipitation to influence the figures I get, I downloaded the data from a specific period of time. I downloaded the data from December to March. And this period is the dry season in Ghana, when there is less to no rainfall. Therefore, the figures I'm getting is not likely to have been influenced by rainfall or high precipitation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So fascinating. We'll open up for questions. We have about 19 minutes of comments.
Okay, so it's a really nice presentation, but I just have like a little question concerning, you mentioned something about investigating what actually caused the increase from 2000 to 2023, within that's 23 years or so. So a part of me just kept asking, like, why don't you take a look at the population data over that region? Probably how soon is it actually increasing over that period compared to what you have between 1990 and 2000? That's one. And again, the second one was, I was going to ask a question about the whole cloud coverage issue of the data. That when was the data, like which period we actually consider as like the dry season or the wet season? Then you later said like it's the dry season. I still don't know why you still kind of have clouds over that period, because at that period you kind of have the clouds towards the coast, like down in the coastal region. And I don't really know the location of this lagoon. Is it like in the central Ghana, or like is it connected to the Atlantic Ocean? Okay, oh, So like, is the lagoon connected to the Atlantic Ocean?
It's a closed lagoon, so it's not connected to the ocean. It's closer to the ocean, but not connected to the ocean.
I mean, the only question I have is just like, why are you not considering like the population data to just ascertain like, is it that the population increase over that very short period, like that 23 years could have influenced the increase in the deposition into the land?
Thank you very much for your question. I didn't consider population because the population of the people in that area wouldn't necessarily have a direct impact on the quantity of water in the lagoon. It may have impact on the pollution, the level of pollution, but not necessarily have an impact of the quantity of water in the lagoon. That is why I want to go ahead to look at the volume of the lagoon. And then if I realize that the volume is actually reducing, but then the area is increasing, it means that there is some form of sediment deposition in the lagoon, causing the lagoon to be shallow. That's why the water is rising, but not necessarily the quantity of water rising. And if that is the case, that is when I will look at other factors that may cause a lot of this sediment deposition, and that is where pollution will come, population will come in to look at what's the population change of the area over that period of time.
If you were to expand the project or continue with it, or I don't know what stage you are with all of this, but I'm curious, given the availability of data that you have and the particular cycles that you're describing, if it would be useful to, instead of just having these fixed pictures, 2000, 1990, 2000, 2020, to track the ebbs and flows, or like the edge of the thing each season, so that you have the data with precipitation of the rainy season, you have the data during the dry season, because it seems to me that those extremes still matter for the people living near the lagoon. Like the highest level of the lagoon during rainy season, if that's changing over decades, that matters as much as the volume of the water during the dry season. And I could imagine one reason you don't do that is because it took a whole lot of work to like pixel like where the water line was. So that's why I'm sort of asking this as like, would it still answer relevant questions, or are there particular reasons that you actually find it more useful to think about these as more static snapshots?
Thank you very much for your question. I think it will be very great to look at rainy citizens so that we will know how high will the lagoon increase during the rainy season, and that will inform people how they should plan during the rainy season, if they have to relocate during the rainy season or not. Thank you so much for that insight. So this project is actually one of my class projects I did for my GIS class. And after the project, I just loved it. So I decided to further increase the project after the class presentation. So I think it's a nice thing. I will get time and I can look into it.
Follow that, yeah, because my question was also around where you see this going, how you would like it to be used. So if you had more time to work on this project, yeah, what other aspects of the lagoon would you look into? And
if I have more time, there is extensive work that have been done on this lagoon, broadening from looking at the level of contamination to how the lagoon pH have been affected by contamination and all those things. But when I read on flooding in Ghana, I lived in Ghana and I had a bad experience with flooding. So when I was looking at flooding and how a lot of houses are around the lagoon, I tend to ask myself, we have a lot of research on Fosu Lagoon, and I've not had any research talking about how this pollution can lead to flooding and everything. So let me look at it. Let me look at that aspect. So I would say that if I have a lot of time, I'll just consider what she said, to look at the rainy season and the dry season. And I think it will be an interesting paper, and a good insight for people around those areas. It would be good insight in planning those areas so that they wouldn't just be taken by surprise. If actually the water level in the lagoon is rising, then there is a cause for alarm because the increase was really huge over that short period. And if it's not because of sediment deposition and the volume actually is rising, then in the near future, people should start thinking about relocating, and or they should start thinking about how to build a nice fence around the lagoon to prevent it from overflowing its bounds to cause distraction.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is very fascinating one, yeah, and well presented. I just have a minor question, and this is talked about climate change. And I'm interested in seeing that rate of climate change, especially when you look at what is happening, irrigation flooding and either increasing or decreasing water levels. So as an expert in the field, can you elaborate more to ask dummies, right? On the role of climate and how this will factor in or might factor into what's happening around the lagoon.
Okay, I must say that I'm not really an expert in climate. That's not.
I talked about
Yes.
raised a question to be probably because of climate.
That's
change,
not
right?
my area of expertise. Is the climate one here. But well, if, as I said, if the lagoon, the volume of the water is increasing, then there are factors, because looking at how the lagoon is, people fish there, there is no way people will be depositing water in the lagoon. So if the lagoon is increasing, then what exactly is causing the lagoon to increase? Is it because of climate? There is a lot of rainfall in that area over time. Is it because of temperature? Because when there is high temperature over that place, there will be like evaporation at that area, and this evaporation can reduce the water volume, not much, but there can be a little reduction. Because looking at this long period of time, definitely there will be a reduction. So does it mean that at that area, I can look at the rainfall pattern in that area, because if there is a high rainfall and there is low temperature, therefore little of the water is being evaporated, then we should see the level, the quantity of the water still being a lot. So I may look at rainfall and temperature to also use it to analyze the data to see the changes in the trend.
Yeah, about the climate.
Yeah.
So, I was just gonna say, just a way to kind of monitor the climate change and its contribution to the lagoon. You could just a comment is something you could do, like, since you're considering a particular date range, something between December and March, throughout the entire period. I'll just advise, why don't you try to check for the rainfall start date and the end dates for this period, because they kind of shift over time due to the effect of climate change, and that could have affected. That could have actually been that could have been the reason why you're experiencing some kind of increase in water in the lagoon over those periods. So why don't you kind of monitor the rainfall start date and the cessation over like the years, so to monitor like the shift over time, and with that you will know, like, oh, is it really anthropogenic activities that's actually causing this? Is it climate change? Is it something else?
To add to that, expanding the time series too, like if you looked at the rates and end dates of each year between 1990 and 2023, you could get a lot more data that way, and that could make a more compelling argument. By expanding your time series, you can still keep your measurements here. These are great, but like having that extra data on rainfall per year and how the rainfall has flowed over the years could help to further drive home your conclusion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions?
I think I might have one. Was a nice presentation. Yes, so I wanted to ask, you made mention that the Fosu Lagoon is an area that's probably surrounded by industries, residential areas, and commercial areas. So I wanted to find out from you, have you also considered the number of perhaps industry that's been established around the Fosu area within that the duration that you are having this research, and to also find out perhaps if there is an activity over there that has been held by the industries that's also perhaps increasing the volume of the water level at Fosu Lagoon. Maybe you could check that also.
Thank you so much.
I can add a comment. This is maybe the anthropologist in me coming out. Of course, I'm interested in what you mentioned, that the water is significant. This lagoon in particular is significant religiously, economically, socially, and it's something that really means a lot to people in the region. So I was wondering if your research looks at the changing practices and engagements between the people and the water. There is sort of a spiritual connection there, at least that I'm maybe getting from this brief presentation. So how do people continue, if at all, to use the water knowing it's polluted or contaminated with these shifting water levels? What are the people doing? Do they organize? Are there local efforts to kind of address these water issues? So that's I guess my question. And then the second part would be, have you thought about looking into other communities around the world who have faced maybe some similar circumstances with regards to having that spiritual connection with the water, and then finding these problems or these obstacles with regards to pollution and water levels, climate change essentially, and human factors that contribute to that. So I'm thinking, Native American communities in the US, where water is life, is kind of, this very important saying. And people have become activists over water, access to water, clean water, things like that. So does that factor into your research at all?
Thank you so much for your question. So with regards to practices in the Fosu Lagoon, because of the increasing contamination of the lagoon, and the spiritual benefits the lagoon have to the people, the paramount chief has passed a law where in the month of August, where there's festival, the Fosu festival is celebrated, the people are prevented from fishing in the lagoon throughout this month. People are not allowed to farm around the lagoon or do the normal practices that have been done closer to the lagoon. And this is a way to preserve the lagoon throughout that specific period. And because a lot of people get their livelihood from this lagoon, they can't do it for the entire year. But these people also appreciate the spiritual significance of the lagoon. So this chief, the paramount chief, and the others of the area have taken advantage of the spiritual beliefs of the people to use this target, which is the month for the festival, to sort of preserve the lagoon, to prevent people from doing the day-to-day activities, and also prevent or reduce contamination of the lagoon during that period. So people are not really allowed to go to the lagoon regularly. People are not allowed to farm near the lagoon. People are forbidden from fishing in the lagoon. And the people in the town are even forbidden from buying a fish that has been caught in the lagoon. And that prevents fishermen from fishing, because if you go and fish in the lagoon, you wouldn't get people to patronize it. So during the month of August, the lagoon is free from fishing and other human activities until the end of the month, where the chief pours the libation to end the festival, to crown the festival. After that, people are allowed to do the various activities they used to do at the lagoon.
There is I don't know what type of a social scientist she is. She is at Clemson University, Abe Sene Harper. And she recently has a paper where she's saying that how these supposedly conservation initiatives don't necessarily care about local ecologies, but rather they tie into these neoliberal economic systems. I will email you the paper. But you might appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, last comments or questions? I think we're already 3 minutes over. All right. Thank you all so much for these brilliant papers, for this very dynamic and engaging discussion. I hope that it was helpful. I hope that you have found little gems to take with you as you continue to develop these projects. And thank you again to KASC for inviting me to serve as the chair of this wonderful panel.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm so excited to be back with you all.
Well, for those of you who are participating, we are having a networking event at the Bird Dog Bar, which is in the Orion Hotel at 5 p.m. Whether or not you're going to join us there, I invite you to pick up some flyers for events, a Ramadan series, reflection